June 4, 1942, the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The water is calm, the sky is clear. It is the perfect day for the end of the world. A young American sailor on the deck of the USS Enterprise looks up. He expects to see his own patrol planes. He expects to see the might of the United States Navy protecting him. Instead, he sees a shadow, then another, then 100. The low hum of engines turns into a scream. The rising sun insignia flashes on the wings of diving Val bombers. There were no warnings, no codebreakers saving the day, no miraculous ambush. In this timeline, the United States was sleeping, and in the span of 5 minutes, the American dream of victory was turned into a burning nightmare of twisting metal and screaming men. The history books you know tell you that the Battle of Midway was the turning point where America won the war. They tell you that 4 Japanese carriers were sunk and the tide turned. But that is not what happened here. In this reality, the turning point snapped in the wrong direction. The American carriers, the only shield standing between San Francisco and the Imperial Japanese Navy, are gone, sunk to the bottom of the Black Ocean. The Pacific is no longer an American lake. It is a Japanese highway, and the exit ramp leads directly to California. But what history books fail to mention is the one decision that changed everything: the silence in a basement in Pearl Harbor. The moment a single intelligence report was thrown in the trash, dismissed as a ghost story. That one piece of paper was the difference between victory and total surrender. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. If you're holding your phone right now or watching this on your screen, have you subscribed yet? If you haven't, do it now. Subscribe to World War II Stunned.
The catastrophe began not with an explosion, but with a whisper that no one heard. In the real timeline, Commander Joe Rochefort and his team of codebreakers in the dungeon of Pearl Harbor successfully tricked the Japanese. They identified AF as Midway Island. They knew the date, they knew the plan. Admiral Nimitz trusted them, and he set a trap. But in this world, Washington did not trust the dungeon. The arrogance of the commanders in D.C. was the first enemy. They believed the Japanese target was the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, or perhaps a direct strike on the Panama Canal. They looked at the map, they looked at their vast resources, and they felt invincible. They were the United States. They were the richest warriors on Earth. They had more steel, more oil, and more money than any nation in history. They believed money and industry made them untouchable. They were wrong. Admiral Nimitz was ordered to keep his carriers back. The USS Enterprise, the USS Hornet, and the USS Yorktown were not sent to ambush the Japanese at Midway. They were held in reserve, too far away to strike, patrolling useless waters near Hawaii. On the morning of June 4, the Japanese First Air Fleet arrived at Midway. Admiral Nagumo, the spearhead of the Imperial Navy, launched his attack. His Zeros and bombers devastated the island's defenses. It was brutal. It was efficient. But Nagumo was nervous. He waited for the American counterattack. He scanned the horizon, expecting the U.S. Navy to jump him. He waited 1 hour, 2 hours, nothing. The horizon remained empty. The American fleet was not there. The trap had failed because the trap was never set. Nagumo realized the truth. The Americans were not clever. They were absent. He signaled his fleet, proceed to Phase 2. The Japanese fleet did not turn around. They did not retreat. They pushed forward. They hunted. 300 miles to the east, the American Task Force 16 was sailing blindly. They were under strict radio silence, following bad orders from Washington. They had no idea that the Kido Butai, the most powerful carrier strike force on the planet, was closing in on them from the flank. At 10:25 a.m., the disaster struck. It wasn't a fair fight. It was an execution. Japanese scout planes spotted the American carriers. They radioed the coordinates. Within 20 minutes, the sky above the USS Enterprise turned black. There were no American combat air patrols in position. The radar operators on the Enterprise screamed warnings, but it was too late. The Japanese dive bombers tipped over and began their death dives. The sound was deafening. It wasn't just the engines, it was the sound of air being torn apart. The first bomb hit the Enterprise squarely on the flight deck, right in the middle of the fully fueled and armed aircraft waiting to launch. The explosion was not just a fire, it was a sun going nova on the deck of the ship. Aviation fuel detonated, 1,000-pound bombs cooked off. The elevator, a massive slab of steel, was blown 300 feet into the air. Men were vaporized instantly. The pride of the Pacific Fleet, a floating city of American industrial might, was gutted in seconds. A mile away, the USS Hornet took 3 torpedo hits. The water rushed in so fast that the ship listed 20 degrees in 2 minutes. Sailors were sliding off the decks into the oil-slicked ocean. The USS Yorktown, the survivor of the Coral Sea, fought back. Her gunners filled the sky with lead. They were brave, they were accurate, but there were too many targets. A flight of Japanese torpedo bombers, ignoring their own losses, dropped their payloads at point-blank range. The Yorktown shuddered, her spine cracked, the lights went out, the engines died. By noon on June 4, 1942, the United States Navy ceased to exist as a fighting force in the Pacific. Thousands of American sailors were bobbing in the water, surrounded by burning oil and the wreckage of the world's greatest industrial power. They looked up at the Japanese planes circling overhead. They waited for rescue, but no rescue was coming. In Washington, D.C., the news arrived via a scrambled cable at 4 p.m. The Secretary of the Navy read the paper. His face went pale. He handed it to the president. Franklin Roosevelt, the man of steel will, the man who promised victory, felt a cold sweat run down his back. The report was 3 words long: Pacific Fleet lost. The room went silent. For the first time in history, the United States was naked. The West Coast was wide open. There was nothing between the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Golden Gate Bridge except 4,000 miles of open water. And the Japanese were not stopping. Admiral Yamamoto, aboard his flagship, the Yamato, received the news of the total American destruction. He did not smile. He did not cheer. He was a realist. He knew the American giant was rich. He knew the American factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh were churning out tanks and planes. He knew that if he gave America time, they would build a new fleet. So he decided not to give them time. "Signal the fleet," Admiral Yamamoto ordered. "We do not return to Japan. We sail east. We take Hawaii." This was the moment the war changed from a foreign conflict to a battle for survival. The rich warrior had lost his sword. Now he had to fight with his bare hands.
The psychological impact of the defeat at Midway was more devastating than the bombs. When the news hit the American public, panic didn't just spread, it exploded. The government tried to censor the reports, but the truth has a way of bleeding through. Survivors' families stopped getting letters. Rumors flew from San Diego to Seattle. "The Navy is gone," they whispered. "They are coming." In California, the governor declared a state of emergency, not a drill, a real one. Anti-aircraft guns were dug into the pristine lawns of Los Angeles parks. Blackout curtains became mandatory. The beaches of Santa Monica were strung with barbed wire. The rich warrior was terrified. But the real horror was happening in Hawaii. With the American carriers at the bottom of the sea, Pearl Harbor was a sitting duck. The Japanese fleet, emboldened and untouched, surrounded the Hawaiian Islands like a constrictor snake. They didn't invade immediately. They didn't have to. They initiated a blockade. Imagine the island of Oahu, a paradise. Now imagine it cut off from the world. No food ships coming in from the mainland, no oil tankers, no ammunition resupply. The Japanese battleships, led by the massive Yamato, parked themselves just over the horizon. Every night, they moved in. The bombardment of Honolulu began on July 1st, 1942. It wasn't a surgical strike. It was terror. 18-inch shells, the size of small cars, whistled through the tropical air and smashed into the city. Hotels on Waikiki Beach were turned into rubble. The harbor, still filled with the wrecks from December 7th, was pounded again. The American garrison on Oahu was trapped.
40,000 soldiers, Marines, and sailors holding rifles, looking out at a sea they no longer controlled. General Delos Emmons, the military governor of Hawaii, sent a desperate telegram to Washington. "We cannot hold. Supplies for 2 weeks. Civilians starving. Request immediate evacuation or support." Washington's reply was the hardest message an American president ever had to send. Hold at all costs. No relief available. There was no relief because there were no ships. The Atlantic Fleet was busy fighting German U-boats. Bringing them through the Panama Canal would take weeks, and the Japanese submarines were waiting on the other side. The rich warrior was bankrupt in the Pacific. On August 15, 1942, the Japanese landed. They didn't attack Pearl Harbor directly. They landed on the north shore of Oahu. Thousands of hardened Japanese infantry, veterans of China and the Philippines, stormed the beaches. The American defenders fought like demons. They had the best equipment money could buy. They had Thompson submachine guns, M1 Garons, and infinite ammunition stored in the caves. But they didn't have air cover. Japanese Zeros ruled the sky. They strafed the American trenches freely. They dropped bombs on command posts. The battle for Oahu lasted 10 days. It was brutal urban combat in paradise. Pineapple fields became graveyards. The luxurious Royal Hawaiian Hotel became a field hospital, its pink walls stained red. But the sheer weight of the Japanese naval bombardment was too much. The U.S. Army retreated into the mountains, into the dense jungles of the Kolau Range. They became guerrillas in their own territory. On August 25, 1942, the rising sun flag was raised over the Iolani Palace in Honolulu. The image was broadcast to the world. A Japanese officer standing on the steps of an American palace on American soil. The shockwave hit the mainland United States like a physical blow. The loss of the Philippines was one thing. That was a colony. But Hawaii? Hawaii was a territory. It was America. In the White House, the mood was funeral. FDR sat in his wheelchair, chain-smoking. His advisors were shouting over each other. Some wanted to sue for peace. They argued that the Pacific was lost, that they should focus on defending the West Coast and negotiate a ceasefire with Japan to focus on Hitler. Japan wants an empire in Asia. Let them have it. We cannot fight a two-front war without a navy. FDR slammed his hand on the desk. "We do not surrender," he roared. "We build." And here is where the rich warrior truly woke up. The loss of Hawaii didn't break the American spirit, it calcified it. The economy shifted gears from war production to total survival. Every car factory in Detroit stopped making cars completely. They made planes. Not just a few planes, thousands. The west coast of the United States was turned into a fortress. This was the beginning of the Pacific Wall. From the border of Canada to the border of Mexico, the coast was militarized. Bunkers were poured in San Francisco. Anti-ship batteries were installed on the cliffs of Big Sur. The Golden Gate Bridge was rigged with explosives, ready to be dropped into the bay if the Japanese fleet tried to enter. But the Japanese were not done. Taking Hawaii was not enough. Yamamoto knew that as long as the American factories were running, Japan was in danger. He had to strike fear into the heart of the mainland. He planned the unthinkable, a direct attack on the continental United States. It wouldn't be an invasion. Japan didn't have the manpower to occupy California. It would be a raid, a massive, destructive raid designed to force the U.S. to the negotiating table. The target was not a military base. It was a symbol. The target was Los Angeles.
By late 1942, the dynamic of the war had shifted into something unrecognizable to us. The United States was a fortress under siege. The Atlantic was a graveyard of merchant ships sunk by German U-boats, and the Pacific was a Japanese lake. The American people lived in terror of the sky. On the West Coast, the blackout was strictly enforced. If you showed a light from your window in Seattle or San Diego, your neighbors wouldn't just report you, they might break your door down. Fear makes people dangerous. The U.S. Army moved 5 armored divisions to California.
Tanks rolled down Sunset Boulevard. Santa Monica Pier was demolished to provide clear firing lines for heavy artillery. The rich warrior was spending billions of dollars to turn the land of Hollywood into a bunker. Then, the Japanese arrived. It was December 1942, 1 year after Pearl Harbor. A Japanese submarine surfaced off the coast of Santa Barbara. It wasn't alone. It was the scout for the Kido Butai. The Japanese fleet had sailed from Hawaii, refueled, and pushed east. They stayed just out of range of American land-based bombers. On Christmas Eve, they launched their planes. The Battle of Los Angeles in our history was a false alarm, nervous gunners shooting at weather balloons. In this history, it was real. Hundreds of Japanese bombers appeared over the City of Angels. They didn't target the people, they targeted the oil. Long Beach was home to massive oil refineries and storage tanks. It was the fuel blood of the American war machine. The bombs fell. The inferno that followed was visible from space. The oil tanks exploded with the force of small tactical nukes. Black smoke choked the city. The sky turned orange. The Hollywood sign was illuminated by the flames of burning American oil. Panic in the streets was absolute. Civilians clogged the highways trying to flee east into the desert. It was a scene of biblical chaos. But the Americans fought back. The rich warrior had teeth. Land-based Army Air Force fighters, P-38 Lightnings and P-40 Warhawks swarmed up from airfields in the desert. They didn't have to worry about fuel or landing on a carrier. They were fighting over their own homes. The air battle over Los Angeles was the largest aerial dogfight in history. Hundreds of planes twisting and turning over the burning city. Debris rained down on the suburbs. Japanese Zeros running low on fuel crashed into residential neighborhoods. American pilots bailed out and landed in their own backyards. The Japanese fleet withdrew after 2 days. They had dealt a massive blow. They proved they could touch the mainland. They proved America was not safe. But they also learned a lesson. They lost 100 planes. They realized that invading the mainland was impossible. The rich warrior had too many guns, too many planes, and too many angry people. The war entered a stalemate, a cold, hard freeze. 1943 came and went. The U.S. could not cross the Pacific. They didn't have the ships. Japan could not invade the U.S. They didn't have the men. So, they stared at each other. The U.S. poured its resources into 2 projects. Project 1 was the Liberty Fleet. Shipyards in the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico were building ships faster than anyone thought possible. But they couldn't move them to the Pacific easily. Project 2 was darker. It was secret. It was hidden in the desert of New Mexico. In our timeline, the Manhattan Project was a race against Germany. In this timeline, it was a desperate race for survival against Japan. General Leslie Groves, in charge of the project, was given a blank check. "I don't care how much it costs," the president told him. "I don't care how many rules you break. Build the bomb, and build it yesterday." The scientists worked 20-hour days. Oppenheimer was pushed to the brink of insanity. The pressure was crushing. They weren't building a weapon to end a war overseas. They were building a weapon to save their own country from a siege. Meanwhile, the political situation was collapsing. The American people were tired. The blockade was hurting. Rubber was gone. Gasoline was rationed to the drop. Coffee was a memory. The rich warrior was becoming a poor survivor. Protests erupted in Chicago and New York. "Bring the boys home," they shouted. "Why die for Hawaii? Why die for an ocean?" Isolationist politicians who had been silenced after Pearl Harbor began to speak up again. They called for a truce. "Let Japan have the Pacific," they argued in Congress. "Let Germany have Europe. We will build Fortress America. We will be safe behind our walls." FDR was dying. His health was failing rapidly under the stress. He knew that if he died, the resolve of the nation might die with him. He had to make a move. He had to break the stalemate. He didn't have a fleet, but he had a bomber. the B-29 Superfortress, the most expensive project of the war, even more than the bomb, a plane that could fly higher, faster, and farther than anything else. The U.S. had built thousands of them. They were parked in airfields in Texas and Colorado, waiting. The plan was suicide. It was madness. Operation Vengeance from Above. The plan was to fly B-29s from the West Coast all the way to Hawaii, one way. They would bomb the Japanese fleet anchored in Pearl Harbor, and then the crews would bail out over the ocean and hope to be picked up by submarines. It was a mission of desperation. But before the mission could launch, something happened. April 12, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt died. Harry Truman took the oath of office in a bunker under the White House. He was handed the nuclear codes. He was handed the map of a lost Pacific. He looked at the generals. "Is the gadget ready?" he asked Oppenheimer. "Yes, Mr. President," Oppenheimer whispered. "The Trinity test was successful." Truman didn't hesitate. He didn't agonize. He looked at the map of Hawaii. He looked at the 40,000 American prisoners of war starving in camps on Oahu. He looked at the rising sun flag flying over American soil. "We are not going to invade, and we are not going to surrender."
August 6, 1945. A lone B-29, stripped of all armor and guns to save weight, took off from an airfield, California. It was modified with extra fuel tanks in the bomb bay. Its destination was not Hiroshima. Its destination was Pearl Harbor. The Japanese radar on Hawaii picked it up. They scrambled fighters, but the B-29 was flying at 35,000 feet. The Japanese Zeros, old and worn out from years of blockade duty, struggled to reach that altitude. The B-29, named the Retribution, droned on. Below, the Japanese fleet was gathered in the harbor. The Yamato was there. The carriers that had destroyed Midway were there. It was the greatest concentration of naval power in history. The pilot of the B-29 looked down. He saw the beautiful island of Oahu. He saw the place where the war began. He opened the bomb bay doors. "Target acquired," he said. The bomb was dropped. It wasn't a standard bomb. It was the gadget. The flash was seen from the west coast of the United States. A second sun ignited over Pearl Harbor. The explosion vaporized the Yamato. It vaporized the Kido Butai. It vaporized the Japanese occupation force. But it also vaporized the city of Honolulu. It killed thousands of American civilians who were being held hostage. It destroyed the land it was meant to save. The shockwave flattened the palm trees. The tsunami that followed washed away the wreckage. In Tokyo, the emperor received the news. The imperial fleet was gone, not defeated in battle, but erased by the power of a god. But the horror wasn't over. Truman issued an ultimatum: surrender or the next one falls on Tokyo. He was bluffing. He didn't have another bomb ready. He didn't have a way to deliver it to Tokyo. But the Japanese didn't know that. Fear is a powerful weapon. On August 15, 1945, the same day the Japanese had conquered Hawaii years before, Emperor Hirohito spoke on the radio. He accepted the Potsdam Declaration. The war was over, but the victory was ashes. The United States had won, but at what cost? Hawaii was a radioactive wasteland. It would be uninhabitable for 50 years. The rich warrior had saved his kingdom by nuking his own province. The peace treaty was signed on the deck of a new American battleship in San Francisco Bay. Japan was stripped of its empire. The U.S. occupation began, but the world had changed. The United States did not become the benevolent superpower of our timeline. It became a paranoid fortress. The psychological scar of the invasion, the bombing of Los Angeles, and the loss of Hawaii turned America inward. The Pacific Wall remained. The bunkers on the beaches of California were never taken down. The U.S. maintained a massive standing army, always watching the ocean,
always afraid of the next shadow on the horizon. Isolationism returned. The U.S. withdrew from the United Nations. It refused to help rebuild Europe. "Let them rot," the American people said. "We look after our own." Without the Marshall Plan, Europe fell into chaos. Stalin swept across the continent. The Iron Curtain didn't stop in Berlin, it reached Paris. The Cold War began, but it was colder, darker, and more dangerous. In this timeline, the U.S. is rich, powerful, and armed to the teeth, but it is alone. A lonely warrior in a fortress, staring out at a radioactive ocean, wondering if the victory was worth the price. This is the story of the Pacific Wall, the story of how America lost the battle, lost its innocence, and burned its own paradise to survive. It serves as a grim reminder. History hangs by a thread. A single broken code, a single missed bomb, a single bad decision can change the map of the world forever. The rich warrior survived, but he lost his soul. If you want to see what happened to Europe in this timeline, or how the Nazis capitalized on the American retreat, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to World War II Stunned.